Welcome, good morning. First question, who of you is not speaking German? Okay, we'll stay in English anyway because there will be a recording. Sometimes it's weird when only Germans are in the room speaking English, as we have today. But as I said, this is going to be a recorded session, so we'll continue in English. Good morning, and we talk about a topic that is important for everyone, and that topic is creativity. We are, of course, in a time where creative content like songs, videos, texts, images are even produced by artificial intelligence or can be produced by artificial intelligence. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the value of human creativity in the age of algorithms, of AI, of apps that everyone has on their smartphone that can create content and they can play like if they were creative at all. Then we are also a time where we face many challenges, environmental challenges, social challenges, political challenges all around the world. And we have the feeling often that creativity can be one of the most important solutions to solve some of these problems. And we're going to talk about all that and a book that is going to be published. Of course, we are at the book fair with Bernhard Zünkeler. Bernhard wrote a book called Atlas der Kreativität, Atlas of Creativity. You can see it here. It will be published spring next year. And you can learn more about the book and about Bernhard at choosygray.com. Bernhard says, imagine that there are maps in which metropolis of creative thinking and rivers of innovative actions are marked. You can orient yourself on them and build your own connections, regardless of whether you're a manager of your own life or on the road or a decision maker who needs the cooperation of many people. Bernhard studied law and art history and received his doctorate in law. He worked for many years also as a business lawyer. In 2009, his life changed completely, or better, he changed his life completely. He turned his passion into his profession and became co-founder of the Urban Art Lab ESMOA in Los Angeles. And his work in Germany focuses on new work inspiration projects with companies, but also as an art curator. They have been awarded numerous awards. In 2018, he co-founded the artist collective Frieders, and in June, Dreisat, German, big German TV channel, aired the long-running documentary Art is a State of Mind about Bernhard. Welcome, Bernhard Zünkeler. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, this is day 3 of the book fair, so I talked so much during the last 3 days that I somehow seem to lose my voice. My name is Holger Volland, and I'm with Brand 1 Publishers. Bernhard, let's start very simple. What is creativity?
Yeah, that sounds like a simple question, but it's actually not such a simple question, because I'm working in this field now for all my life almost, I have to say. But the first part, I worked more in the world of logic and reasoning and being very focused on certain targets and things. And since 15 years or 16 years, you mentioned it, I worked more sort of in the wild growing power of art, where people don't stick to certain ways of doing things. And I found myself very often in a world where sort of the logic part, or the more rational and reasoning part, and the more wild growing part of ourselves is actually on two sides, and they fight each other in many ways. And creativity is both, you know. It's a lot of layers of your intelligence. They all form together creativity. And if we take creativity as a word, it derives from the Latin word creare, which basically is the most basic things of forming things, and in a way it's also a word for life itself, you know. And so I think the whole fight about logic on the one side and emotion and let's say wild growth and logic construction, it's not an opposite. It's actually in ourselves that it all works together.
Let's start with a little experiment. Who of you would say you are creative? Can you please raise your hand if you think you are creative? Okay, not everyone. Who of you would say, I'm not creative? Ah, okay. Sometimes when you ask people, you hear that they're saying, well, I don't feel like I'm very creative. For example, I cannot draw very well, or I'm not able to play an instrument, or whatever. What do you tell people saying I'm not creative?
Well, that's I think one of the misunderstandings, that people perceive themselves as if they don't feel like, oh, I'm not very spontaneous, I don't have all the craftsman skills, that they feel like, oh, maybe I stood away from this, but everybody is super creative. I mean, we all learned a language, and a language is probably one of the most abstract things where we can work with and still invent new things all day long. And so I don't think there's any person who shouldn't feel like very creative, you know. And for me, the main thing is, as a driving force, to encourage people to think really the thing about seeing structures, seeing patterns in your surroundings, and understand. For example, let's say the power of the rectangle. You know, we as humans, we organized our modern world pretty much with rectangles. And everybody asked me, okay, please think outside of the box. And I said, well, first of all, you have to see the box you are in. And for example, when you go to nature, it's almost impossible to find any rectangles. You know, it's not there. When you look at this space, you see the lights, you see the windows, you see this, you see the screen, you see the sheet of paper, even the napkin is a rectangle. You would never, only a few crystals have like basically rectangles in their mind. So if you start with a spreadsheet, if you look at your computer screen, your mind already gets narrowed down. And the thing is, rectangles are very, very effective tools. You know, you can basically connect them without wasting space. So what we have the tendency of saying, for example, when you look at the logistic worlds, you know, before we invented the box, which is basically a 3D version of a rectangle, you know, you had those nets, and the bananas were basically carried from one boat to the next boat, and then now we boxed everything in. Now you cannot even transport something from here to China without boxing it in, because it's so efficient, the rectangle. On the other hand, when you think always in the rectangle ways, and if you compress everything from a calendar box, from a folder on your computer screen, everything, you immediately start to basically narrow yourself. And the thing is, the rectangles become like our comfort zone. As soon as somebody doesn't fit into a rectangle, you start to get nervous, or you feel like, oh, this is not in order, this doesn't work. And I have another question for you. Sorry, I want to say it's important that you step out of this once in a while and almost make it a regular habit to practice to step outside of the box. And nature is just a perfect thing. I mean, just take every day 5 minutes and look into the sky, and that almost recalibrates your mind, because you see, well, modern world is not based on this structure and logic things.
And that you said that our whole world is in rectangles. I mean, if you look at our body shapes, we're definitely not rectangles. But we, sorry, we invented costumes and, for example, suits that make us more rectangular, which is a really funny thing.
Yeah, I think it's because we understand more and more of the world, so probably we want to, let's say, feel a little bit safe because it looks all chaotic and more knowledge. With more knowledge, we feel the need of probably of finding order in the chaos, you know. And I think you need that, and we have a great ability to focus, to concentrate, and all these things. But on the other hand, you need also the other abilities, and you have to step from one side to the other side in order to really use it. And I found in my, and that's also the reason why I wrote the book, those are not different worlds. They are not apart. They can really grow together, and you can profit from that. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, for example, anybody who doesn't have a drawer at his house, or like say a little box, because usually when you have your handbag or something else, or there's usually next to the door, when you get out of the house, you have something in your pockets. You know, it goes from little sand to keys to coins to whatever, and usually you put it out and then you put it on your, maybe on your night drawer or somewhere else, and then after a while you have all those, let's say, pieces of chaos, and then you put them in a box. And almost everybody I know has a drawer or something in the kitchen or wherever where you basically put your chaos in the box, and you close the box and you feel safe.
But what is the reason for us not liking chaos?
Well, I think because it's more and more knowledge comes to us, and more information comes to us, and it becomes faster and faster and faster. And I think what we want to organize that, but the beauty of chaos and spontaneity, and to learn that, is a little bit of yeah, you kind of start dancing with chance, you know. And it is important because it's like a muscle, you know. If you don't train that, if you immediately switch to the boxes and try to give structure to everything and try to give reason and try to say, well, this is cause and this is the result, and go on a specific target to it, you start, it almost becomes, you overload your muscles, you know. It's like a cramp. And I think that's why it's important to see both worlds, and that's also why you have to, you know, chaos is also chance, you know, and you have to embrace both.
So since you said creativity is a muscle that needs to be trained, we're all in this room now. Do you have like a little exercise for us that we can do now in order to train our creativity muscles? Sorry, we didn't prepare that question, but...
Well, I mean, the first thing I usually say, well, you know, we are all boxed in a way, and the easiest way is basically to close your eyes. I mean, we can all close our eyes because...
Let's close our eyes.
Yeah. One of the basic drivers or closest drivers of creativity is inspiration. And inspiration comes from contemplation. Contemplation is one of the sources of inspiration. So when you close your eyes and just take down all the noise, then something comes to you. And that's basically the starting point you can always use. And when you look now into yourself with closed eyes, think of what really matters to you. Give it just a minute. What really matters to you? Well, I mean, you have probably just now experienced, okay, what are those two guys talking about on the stage? I'm somewhere, I'm you know, you have to discover a little bit sort of who are you, you know, and by just closing your eyes and becoming just you, you understand a little bit more sort of, yeah, you don't need structure. You don't need structure, and you can just become yourself, and with this, take this as a starting point.
It's really interesting what you're saying because yesterday I had a business meeting with a consultant, and she said that most of her clients these days are freaking out because they have too much information, they have to look into too many systems, they have an overload of tasks, they have an overload of frames they have to work in, and still what they're asking for is more tips, more rules, more ideas of how to get rid of that overload. And I asked her, so what is your advice to them? Do you give them like lists of how to get rid of overload, which add actually to the overload? And she said, no, my basic advice is try to get rid of almost everything and try to focus on why you started your job in the beginning. What was the reason for you liking the idea of working in that company? And then starting from that point again, to build like your own path into this chaos. And this is exactly what you also said. Let's concentrate, let's contemplate, and start with like a single focus, and try to develop our way through there. You wrote an atlas of creativity. That sounds like a gigantic project how can it be done by just one human being? I mean, we're talking about creativity and we're talking about an atlas. So what is it, like 900 pages, 1,500 pages? I know it's not, but
Well, I have to admit, when I started the project, I mean, in the beginning, you don't know how do you start on such a topic, and I knew I wanted to make discussions possible, interdisciplinary discussions, because the work I do is very different. I mean, for example, like when the refugee crisis was very prominent in our media, we worked with artist collectives to create places where people could meet, like people in the neighborhood of refugee camps could actually understand what's going on, and we created areas in a military facility, closed military facility, an old helicopter hangar, to become like an open cafe for the people around the refugee camp, and then also the people who would step in, and then I had, like, for example, the startup campus for a big technology company like Bosch, where we had to find out, okay, what mind space do you use when you invent new technology? So you see, the projects are so different. Like, people cramped up in a refugee camp, and we stayed there overnight to really understand. When you live 3 weeks and share the same showers and everything, you really get a totally different understanding. And at the same time, you go to a technology company which thinks they're world leaders, and in many ways they are world leaders, and you discover suddenly the different sets of intelligence and what's happening there. You know, once you wake up in the night because there are still children playing in the let's say in an environment where you would say, wow, that's a rough environment, but you still see how sort of your senses understand the way how you are in a totally different surrounding, and then you see it in a technology company. Then you understand we are not only based on rational thinking, we have also sensual thinking, or I would call it a molecular intelligence, which is in in our skin, which is everywhere. And then you have, of course, an emotional intelligence, which has been written about a lot. And then you have your cognitive intelligence, and then comes also a fictional intelligence, which basically means things you can invent or dream that are not in existence. They can actually, I could dream of a river that runs upstream against gravity. So we can even do things that are not rational, that are totally opposite. And at the same time, we are deeply rooted in nature. And to get this together, that was for me my main motivation. And when I started with our most important sense, because it's like the way we look into the world, our sense of viewing. And it's very interesting when you start there, because like most of your brain power is used by analyzing what you see. And when you look at the electromagnetic waves around us, it's only a tiny, tiny, tiny little fraction of reality what we can actually see, because most of those electromagnetic waves are not visible. And it's really interesting that 2/3 of your brain is based on just a tiny fraction of reality, what you see. And when I started writing about our sense of, I was like at 50 pages, and then I realized, okay, there are 82 in total, 82, let's say, major driving forces of our creativity. And I thought, okay, this is a 4,000 pages book. Nobody will ever read that.
You wouldn't find a publisher for that, I can tell you.
So we said, okay, let's find a compromise. So the atlas is like more a condensed version, and it will also find a living sort of component, because we create a lot of projects with this, according to this atlas, and I hope some of you will eventually see, okay, now I know how those elements work together, and I can start a project for myself.
Let's start with the elements working together.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there are 82, you call them metropolises. Metropolises.
Well, in the analogy of the atlas, yeah.
Give us some examples. What are two of these that are important for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, for the metropolis, in a way, are like phenomena, and it's very hard to find them in your brain. In neuroscience, you try to understand, okay, where is your language center, and when you have a stroke, they know it. But a lot of neuroscientists basically say, we are still looking and finding out what is where, and the mind maps, of course, the brain is so complicated we can't really understand, and we have to be honest, because the real things where we know what was where, we know from the First and the Second World War. And the reason is because at that time the bullets, when you got shot in your brain, only parts of your brain were taken apart and they could still survive. So they knew what was missing and you couldn't do afterwards. That was obviously where the bullet hit your head. And since it were like millions of, or let's say hundreds of thousands of people involved, that was basically the big laboratory for neuroscience, which is very, very sad, of course. But at the same time, all the big measurements, MRT and computer topography, and this is still a beginning. So I started by saying, okay, let's find phenomena which we know, like for example, love, or take another which is tenderness or fear or disgust or breathing or viewing. Those are elements where you can see, if you take them away, part of your creativity will suffer from that. And there are like 82 of those metropolises. I would say we have to train them all, and we have to find a common understanding of those. And yeah.
So you invite us, for example, to to dig into our own sense of grief in order to find out why grief, which is a feeling that most of us don't like, why grief is an important aspect of our own creativity. And one of the I mean, it's not a book about exercises, right? So it's
No,
not
no,
like
no.
400 tips to be more creative. But at some points in your book, I had the urge to try out things, of course. So you invite us to reframe things and take grief. And you say, okay, usually we look at grief with feelings like fear or anger, right? Try to reframe it, try to look at grief with the feeling of love, for example, and then find out what happens to your own sense of grief and how you can use other elements of that. Is that how it works, basically, that you train us to reframe our own beliefs?
Well, yeah, in a way, it's like, your creativity has many sources, and you have to if you really understand that everybody has those resources and those sources because nature put them in you. That we all can be fearful means nature sees a reason why we need to be fearful. That's like our big alarm bell, basically our emotional alarm bell to say, okay, if I fear something, there's danger ahead. I don't know yet why, but I know it's there. So in a way, if you really understand that source, that means I can work with it. And the same thing is, for example, inspiration is another tool. We all can get inspired. That's our wake-up call for our intuition. I mean, intuition is basically our permanent way to scan to scan everything and look for patterns and sort of here we are all in a nice surrounding, so basically you forget most of the things because they all fall into a pattern. But if suddenly a white elephant would step into the space, boom, there's your inspiration. You immediately wake up. But it's good to know that you have those sources, because I could like the exercise we did just with contemplation, was closing your eyes. That's also driving your inspiration. So you have a way to deal with it. But I can give you, let's say, three metropolis you have in your
Brain.
system, yeah. And for example, one of the most basic things of creativity is your motoric skills, like how you move. Basically your muscles and your skeleton and all the nerve cells that are controlling this. So this is, of course, every dancer would say, yeah, of course, my motoric skills are a big driver for this. If you go to an office, people would say, well, I have a wheelchair, a rolling chair, I have a adjustable desk. They would almost look at motoric skills totally the opposite way. Anyway, it is in ourselves. But if you take this metropolis and then, for example, you take the metropolis of belief, to envision a future that is not there, but you still go for this future, and then you take the metropolis of doubt. I mean, desperation and doubt, like where you say, I doubt everything, and then you say, belief, doubt, and motoric skills. How do you get those together? They don't fit together. And I would say, well, you can go, in the Middle Ages, they found the bones, like the motoric skills of a person. They put it into a city, they built a cathedral around it, and a lot of people believe those are the bones of Saint Jacob. And then they all take their own bones and walk thousands of kilometers to fight their doubt, just to find belief, So that means like, okay, this is we all know the Jacob's pilgrimage, but this is a great example how 3 centers of your creativity, you can create something that changed the life of many, many people just by creating belief, doubt, and walking.
And this is something that is usable for, of course, individuals, but also for organizations and companies. And one of the most interesting exercises that almost every company goes through almost once a year, every year, is the exercise of how to grow by at the same time reducing the money you have, the budget you have, and the resources you have available, unless of course you're Google or any
Yeah,
other
yeah.
tech company that has like limitless resources. But for example, our company, every year it's the same. I try to find ways of how can we grow without using more resources. And now we also have to ask ourselves, how can we grow without using more ecological resources?
Yeah.
How can we grow without using even more energy that seemed to be limitless in the past? And this is a contradiction that can only be solved by being extremely creative. How Tell me the secret. How do I grow our company without using more resources?
Yeah. I mean, if you would put it in a formula, we all, you know, the famous word less is more. You know, less is more is one of the big things in design and art. And it's one example to say, okay, we all now have the challenge to use less material, less carbon footprint, and still create more. You know, and I remember the first time I was working at headquarter of a big telecommunication company, and they had lots of old desks, you know, and they were saying, okay, we just throw them away. And I said, well, you don't have to do that. We can change those desks, and we can make something fun out of it. And actually, I teach people how to calculate in a new way, and we make less more. So what we did is we took some of the old tables from a cafeteria, and we just took a laser, not a laser, a water cutter, and cut out the word more. So basically, we took away material, but the word more made it suddenly a totally new table. And it was an intelligence game of saying, well, this is less is more right there, you know. And sometimes you have to start by understanding their mechanics, their methods that we all can use basically to compress value and to create more value by using less material. And we all know it. You know, if you take away a lot of stuff you collect because you feel like, oh, I might need it. Companies do the same thing. They collect just in case, you know, just in case. But the thing is, a lot of stuff is a burden or becomes a burden, and you can get rid of it, but the opposite, that means you don't need that much material. And on the other hand, you have on the other side of the equation means how do I create more value? And one of the things of creating more value, for example, you can also use this, and you also have it, everybody has it in his pocket now, is like a smartphone. You know, a couple of years ago, we all had a radio, photo, photo camera, we had a computer. I mean, we all had it separately, but multifunctionality is one of the big things where you can actually compress value. And for example, right now you see a big shift is coming. Corona made it clear. I mean, we talk to some cities. Right now they all have, let's say, they want to renovate the schools, they want to renovate the kindergartens, they want to renovate the city hall. And there's, I mean, don't say the name, but there's a city who basically has a crazy city hall. And now after Corona, only 25% of people want to go back there because they feel like, oh, this is not really a nice way to work together. And on the other hand, they have schools, they have other things, and now I would say every city in Germany should think about multifunctionality. You know, why do I have to renovate separately a school and a city hall? Why do I have to isolate all those things? Why not compress? Why not make it more alive? And we also have another project with very industrial area in Germany and a very, let's say, city that really struggles with a pedestrian area, which is totally isolated. And of course, Amazon has a big impact on all those shops and stuff. And so the thing is, how do you create extra value there? Because the houses are already there. How do you get those things compressed and reduce basically the material and the space you have, but create extra value. So that is multifunctionality is, for example, one of the things I would say, yeah, don't think about one thing only in one way. You know, nature never does that. For nature, everything can have multiple purposes.
So we have a company staying with us, working with us, and they reuse their space every Thursday as a dance floor, and have like dancing Thursdays after 6 parties. So we now know that our office space works as a disco as well.
Yeah.
But the atlas of
That's a great example. I mean, this is, if you think about creating extra value, think in complementary ways. You know, if you put strength together, suddenly things can totally change. I mean, you really see it with a smartphone because it has such a strong impact on our lives. You see, suddenly people, they don't write notes anymore, they just make a photograph. I mean, it really changes things, but we can do the same thing with our houses. We can do the same thing with basically everything we have in our life if we think about it in a more complementary way. Also, the whole sharing industry is kind of based on this multifunctionality.
So I'm going to open up in just a bit for your questions. If you have any, you're welcome to ask them. There's Bernhard Zünkeler sitting here, and he will answer all of them. Of course, I have a ton of questions as well. Bernhard, the Atlas of creativity. Tell me a bit about the structure. Why did you use the image, the idea of an atlas, of putting creativity in?
Yeah.
The metaphor.
Well, I think in a way I believe we are in a status, I think I mentioned it before, like where we have really a global situation and we have a total different understanding about where we are going from here. And like in China, for example, people have a totally different understanding of justice. They have a totally different understanding of collaboration. In India, the same way. And I did projects in Taiwan and in Cuba, for example, and they really have a different mindset. But on the other hand, you feel like there is a very common mindset. So what I wanted to do is, before we only like fight each other, we need to really go back and look at the map in a new way. Almost like when the first atlas were created, nobody knew. When you really want to have fun, you look at old maps where nobody knew what's out there, you know. And the funny thing is, when you look at those old maps in the ocean, there were always monsters, you know. Like, we don't know what's there. Don't go there.
Yeah, before there was terra incognita,
like,
there were
monster. So I think this is basically the situation where we are in right now. We have to step back and look. Okay, do we find coordinates? And the only coordinates which are pretty safe from the scientific point of view is our universe is based on 4 pillars, which is basically space, time, matter, and energy. And whatever is in you had to react to those 4 pillars of thinking. So those are kind of our coordinates for, like, when you look at the globe, you have the meridians, and you have the equator. You have certain lines where you can orientate yourself. But those 4 pillars of time, matter, energy, and space, we all have to deal with that. Everything what you do has to deal with that. So this is one point of coordination, and the other point of coordination is basically in your brain, because your brain developed like very roughly in you can say in 4 portions. You know, you have in a way the stem brain. I mean the reptile brain, which is very old, which goes into the last areas of your body, and then you have the small brain, and this is like old. We share this with all mammals. This is kind of our part of being still an animal, if you want to say. And then on top of that is the the midbrain with all the sort of where we think emotion is basically uh, uh, concentrated, and then comes the sort of the cortex, the big specifically mammal part of the brain, but none of the brains have such a big cortex like the human being. And then you have the neocortex. And the thing is, you can coordinate those 4 stages and can take, okay, those are basically the pillars of our intelligence, which is like the old molecular intelligence, which we share with all nature. I mean, most of information in our DNA, we probably share a big part of our DNA with plants. I mean, nobody thinks that way, but that's the reason why I would say, well, if you eat certain materials, you know, just look at the pathway, the periodic table, and look at the sort of what should I eat and what should I better not eat, because if it wasn't consolidated in your body for 2 billion years, I don't think it's a good idea to eat some of the stuff or use it as a you know, you get connected to the whole world on that molecular level, and then you look at the emotional, cognitive, and fictional intelligence, and those are the other coordinates, and that is for me basically the grid where you can organize to understand what creativity has to deal with.
As your publisher, I'm delighted to hear that the following book will be the big cookbook to more creativity. So you give us the coordinates in the book, and then you tell us how to find our way through the metropolis. The metropolises. What is the plural of metropolis? Metropolis? Metropoli? Well, to those cities, and those pathways. We talked about the pathways already. They are interesting because we can choose between billion possibilities of pathways. So you give us a structure, but at the same time you give us, well, certain ideas of how to move within this grid and within this system without, well, actually giving us rules, right? You don't say you have to move from A to B by using this this grid.
No, I mean, I just give examples, but the main thing is once you kind of understand the grid and how, you know, then you look at the world in a little bit different way, because you really understand. For example, when I go to cooperation and they ask me, oh, we want to have to really we want to create the explore value in our people. And then I asked them, okay, let's put a picture up here. And I said, oh, we first have to call our facility guy who can put a nail into the wall. You know, feel like, okay, right there, I give you an example. How do people become more creative if they are not even allowed in their office to put a nail into the wall and have to ask somebody? You know, that's like, you give very different messages. And so that's why I wanted to basically say, well, you know, you can't like isolate certain things. If you don't let spontaneity as one of the driving force become part of that life, you cannot switch it on just like this. You have to build certain streets, and you have to understand the connection of those things. And that's what I hope, that once you see the whole system of all those different drivers of creativity, then it becomes more important, well, you can actually build yourself certain routes for yourself, and if you want to change habits, you can also do that, you know. And probably every one of you who would read the book would probably see, well, for me, there is maybe even one more. You know, I just isolated 82 of those elements, like I mentioned, because I think those are real big drivers, but in many ways it's interesting to see you can create your own streets there.
Do you have questions for Bernhard? There's one question over there. Please wait for the microphone. It comes. Just a second, then we can hear you better.
Thank you. My name is Ulrich from Wiesbaden. One question concerning the term multidisciplinarity. Okay, do you think that people really want multidisciplinarity even in physical meeting places? You pick up the example with cell phones, but I think that's my idea that a lot of people, of course, have such things in the pocket, but use it for, and like to use it only for 5%. Or, and you give us the examples of different public meeting places, and the idea is to make life more dense, I think. And my hypothesis is, do people really want this?
No, I think it's a good question. Especially it shows, there's never one side to it. For example, when we talked about like loneliness or concentration and really focus. I mean, concentration is one of the big drivers of creativity, that we can actually focus on one thing in a way, but your brain, you have to understand, your brain is working differently. You have in your cognitive brain, you actually have the ability to concentrate on one thing, but your senses, they already go in thousand directions, and I feel you have to value the way that people want to when they really need to concentrate and focus on one thing from a cognitive brain. You have to value that and have to create space for that. But it's not like how can I say that it's permanently the way. I know all of us, they like to get triggered by new things. They otherwise you have boredom. Boredom is kind of something we all don't want to know. We don't want to experience. But at the same time, if you need to concentrate, it's catastrophic if your cell phone and it's sort of super busy around you. So you have to basically play with both things. So I wouldn't say people don't want multifunctionality and multidisciplinary. They want it, but they also want quietness and space to breathe. You have to find a way to deal with both.
There's another question in the first row, but also to that question, we saw it also in COVID times when I think it was Bavaria that used the closed pubs as school rooms, because in like the first year of COVID, we tried to not cram like 1,000 pupils into one building, but rather, I don't know, reduce it to 200 and then use other places to school children. And so they reused pubs, for example, something that wouldn't be possible in normal times, but that was possible at these times. So maybe it's also not a question of a general commitment, but maybe a commitment that changes from times, that reacts to the time we're actually in, right?
Yeah. I think the main thing what I wanted to say is you have both in you, and I think it's neither bad or good or whatever. I think in many ways, for example, the hunger is a feeling in our society. Of course, there are people who have to suffer and in a way feel hunger, but most of us have forgotten how the feel of hunger is, that you can stop eating because it's enough. You don't need any more. And the same thing is sometimes also with quietness or calmness or because everything is so busy around us, we have kind of forgotten how good it is to be that. Quietness is great, and on the other hand, you have people who say, "Well, forget about it. I really need that in a much more way because it's burning in like burnout is probably one of the things." So you have to find a good balance. Yeah.
My name is Ulf Rotzam. I write for Brand 1 magazines. Bernard, you mentioned this example of people who are not allowed to hammer a nail in the wall. That doesn't only happen in offices or companies. That reminded me of my mother, who is living in an elderly home in Bavaria, and really I organized to get her a new home, because in the first one the people were not allowed to hang photos or pictures at the wall of the bathroom, because I asked why, and they said the bathrooms are prefabricated, and if you drill a nail into it, it will be damaged, and maybe the water comes out or so. It sounded very crazy, and then I imagined, what do people think who construct these elements that are prefabricated? They should think about the usage of it, and they must know that the bathroom goes into the room and has another wall that usually is used to be decorated, because elderly people always want to have some memorable things that they hang on the wall. So what do you think? Why don't people consider what the consequences are when they construct these elements that are not even made for simple day-to-day things like hanging a picture on the wall?
Well, I mean, that's a good point. It comes right to the way of how do we really see the usage in the end. And what I found in many corporations, they all think about function, very much about function, which is more like the mechanics of being together. So that means like you want seating, that's seating, you know. And you want a bathroom is washing, you know, you have to create. But that every space has also an emotional side, and it also has a sensual side, because it really matters what material you use on the bathroom floor. Of course, everybody knows you don't want it slippery, but there may be ways to say, okay, we can combine certain things. And in this case, I would say they were busy thinking about pure bathroom functions, and they haven't thought about the other layers of your intelligence that also need to be fed, which is like the way how you deal with emotions and past, and the way how you deal with fiction, that maybe you want an inspiring sky in your bathroom. Just when you sit in your bath, you just watch the clouds and it turns you into something different. You know, that's why I think that's the reason why I also wrote the Atlas. Don't forget your other levels of intelligence. Don't only go for the cognitive or the functional and the rational way. Yeah.
It's also a great example for reframing things, right? Look at the bathroom wall, not with the frame of practicality or cleaning, but within the frame of emotion, or how could the bathroom wall like create emotions or change emotions or help people to feel better?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean it's every part, and I think one of the reasons also is that we're missing more diversity, because of course you have all these layers, we have all these layers in ourselves, right? But I just experienced my father. He's 80, and I just saw him that he operated his smartphone with like a little stick. I said, why are you using the stick? And he said, because my skin is so dry, the screen doesn't react to it. So I thought, well, how can technicians at companies like Apple or Google create a screen that is not working with the finger of an 80-year-old, right? And of course, the reason is because there is probably not an 80-year-old in the team. So no one has that layer of thinking of an 80-year-old person and their skin in the team who produces the smartphone. So the solution probably is not only within us, ourselves, like use our own layers, but also combine layers and combine our diverse ideas of creative solutions, yeah, by getting better multidisciplinary, more usage solutions in
Yeah,
our
and
world.
find a good balance, you know, because it's like I totally understand that an architect has to look for the function. I mean, we are always faced with larger projects. Functionality is a big must, you know. But on the other hand, sometimes you understand, okay, but you know, you are, for example, a company working right now in an energy field where you know your energy will close down in 2030, you know. So you can create a headquarter which is purely on function, but you have to change the spirit in your company. And that means the functionality you know now is obsolete in a couple of years. So don't go with a usual functional thing. Start to get into the imagination in the fictional mode. And that's one of the things where I feel like, okay, there's a big task for us, but the beauty is we have all the tools in our brain. They're all there. We just have to understand them. And the nice thing is, I see it with a lot of international projects, those tools are so old, they are older than our cultures. And so a lot of misunderstandings, what we have on a cultural level, on your basic level, we don't have them. You know, that's really beautiful because a lot of, you know, fresh air, everybody needs fresh air. And I've been to a lot of conferences where there was no fresh air and a lot of negotiation processes where they basically say, okay, now we do one task, we open the windows and just everybody takes another seat. And, you know, totally different feeling. Very basic.
Which brings us to the end of the session because there's fresh air outside. We have to change seats. Bernhard, thank you very much for opening our day.
Thank you.
And if you want to see or hear more of Bernhard, go to juicygray.com, and I think you have a link there to the documentary about you, but also to some of your projects.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your ideas of how to use more layers of our creativity. And I wish you a wonderful day at the fair. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.